all strangers.
What this teaches young males is that if you're persistent, even though they try to get away, eventually they fall in love with you.
If you're willing to sing.
That is not such a big, you could just, I know you, I walked with you once upon, etc. You could do that, that's easy. Not? Plus there's a chorus somewhere in the woods. It's amazing. See, she loves it. All you have to do is persist. Keep at it, don't let her say no. Doesn't say you could put your hand over her mouth though, but that's.
Right. We should just finish the movie.
Oh yeah, Pocahontas. No, leave it.
No, leave it.
Leave it. That's the best song.
The wind doesn't really talk to you. The tree doesn't really. Have you ever tried to talk to a tree?
I have.
Yes.
The colors of the wind. Come on. What?
In multiple languages, of course.
Exactly.
Yes. So today we're obviously Mary Wollstonecraft. Not even. She's a proto-feminist. Proto?
Yeah, I know what that is.
So we don't even have feminism yet. And how many of you are familiar with the idea of waves of feminism? One person? Oh dear.
Come on.
You have to
Will you
have-
study us? No one? Let's go.
I'll go to the Wikipedia. It tells you everything you need to know about feminism, which is defunct. I mean, show of hands, how many of you think of yourselves as a feminist?
Yeah.
A little hesitant.
There's no reason, it's just like wanting equality. Like,
Well-
people have blown it up to be something that it's
Yeah,
not.
yeah. Well, tell me this: are women really equal to men?
No.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
All humans are equal.
All
These
of
civilized
them.
societies,
They
we've got
should
to
be.
a place
No,
where
I
like
say
all
when they're
people
not.
can be like, why can't they?
You're not equal in any sense.
Women can have babies.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Never mind.
They can make them inside their bodies. And when the baby's ready, they can push them outside of their bodies, and then they can feed them with their
So
bodies.
then we shouldn't get paid the same.
Now, it's true,
That's the trade-off.
men do help in this process. They spend about, 50 seconds helping. How many of you know where all that was from? That's Jim Gaffigan, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. Not stealing it, just quoting it, which let's
Where's the video?
research.
Copyrighted?
Right, yeah, well. But so first wave feminism doesn't happen until the fight over equal rights. Well, not the Equal Rights Amendment, but that women get the right to vote. So we want, well, that's third wave. Let's go back. So that's France, etc. But we have, when's the amendment? Which amendment is it? That where women get? It doesn't even say women actually.
This is man.
It just says no one should be discriminated or prevented.
Oh, 19th Amendment.
19th Amendment.
Yeah.
So, and is it 1939? I'll have it still there. But it's late. It's late. And they're not even first, of course. Initially, if we think of it, Jefferson et al. Are fighting for the rights of rich white plantation owners and others, because like John Adams doesn't have a plantation, but he's educated, lawyer, has some wealth, et cetera, probably. I don't know that it was that much, but they did have a farm, actually. Of course, not referred to as plantations. But, so rich, white, educated males are equal to the king. Eventually it becomes all white males, whether or not they're rich or educated or not. That's really around President Jackson. Andrew Jackson is considered the first populist elected king. I mean president, right? Sorry about that. And he didn't get elected the first time, remember, because John Quincy Adams won the first runoff between the two of them, but they changed the way the president was selected by the second time he ran against John Quincy Adams, and John Quincy Adams lost. So he continued to serve the country in multiple capacities, defending the slave rebellion on the ship Amistad, I guess, is kind of famous, right? By the way, he also built the greenhouse just down the steps from the Capitol building. If you've ever been there, everybody usually visits. Well, the things you visit are, the Capitol building, the Supreme Court building, the various buildings of the library, right? Library of Congress, which, especially the first building, which was a homage to Jefferson. If you go in, by the way, the Gutenberg Bible that we have is on the one side, and shoot, what's the other book? There's another one that's right next to it, and I can't remember now which one that is. Holy shoot, that's embarrassing. Significant book, too. However, so first wave doesn't even happen till, of course, after the Civil War, and you have the rights given to black males, because they're males. Right? But then finally females are considered equal, and that, by the way, is coincidental with the fight against alcohol, which was, as we become industrialized, people that are constantly drunk are terrible as far as employees are concerned. Remember, Ford has now created the assembly line, and so he supports the fight by the same group that are against prohibition and also for women's rights. But those women absolutely were convinced that men and women were not equal. They were different, and they had different roles to play in society, but they should be legally entitled to property and things of that sort, right? They didn't even have that at the time. There are lots of folks that still are fighting for equality today. But so those were the first wave feminists. The second wave was when I was a kid. Well, not really a kid, I was in college. And we had folks like Betty Friedan, we had Gloria Steinem, who, that was sexy because she was actually she snuck in and became a Playboy bunny undercover. Well, she was actually not undercover. She's undercover the expression.
Right.
Never mind. You get the idea. Playboy bunnies were not undercover. They were kind of there. How many of you know what a Playboy bunny is? No kidding. That's kind of amazing. There are actually directions on the web, by the way, for how you can dress yourself up like a Playboy bunny for Halloween. And don't ask me how I know that. And no, I'm not planning on dressing up like a Playboy bunny for Halloween. However, that would actually be quite cute, wouldn't it? It's just totally unfair. I never had the chance to be a Playboy bunny. Man, I sent my pictures in too, and they just never reply. totally joking. You realize I joke, right? Never sent my pictures in, etc. However, so the second wave was the group that really wanted equality in the sense that the social contract theory promoted. Are you familiar with the social contract? Social construction, actually. So this was the book, came out in '66. Peter Berger, that's a really old copy, I could tell, because it's the same copy I have. Yes?
Yeah, Mr. Jameson, were the women suffragees, was that second wave or first wave?
The suffragettes were
Yes.
first wave.
First wave.
First wave. There were some famous ones too.
Mm-hmm.
But the one I actually saw Gloria Steinem on campus giving a speech, and being a young male trying to attract females in college, and they were all enthusiastic about this, so they were going. It was a Saturday afternoon, so of course I went with them.
Of course.
You know, that was, you know, because if you want to date, you have to act interested in the things that they're interested in. So I, you know, when I try to think of myself with regard to racism, I don't think, I've always been hostile against the idea that I was a racist. I remember even in the Army, when I arrived at Berlin, my first full-fledged duty station, and we had the School of Standards, SOS, training for a couple of days before we were, you know, released to the unit. And one of the sessions was a couple of military, you know, NCOs whose MOS was 00U, which my MOS, for example, was 98 Golf G, right? It was a Russian 98 Charlie. The 98 series were the intelligence, right? But so here's this 00U. You know, what is he? He's a social worker. And he's got us all sitting around in a circle, which is, you know, that's, new thing, you know, inclusiveness, right? And he comes out and he addresses all of us and he says, well, the first thing you have to accept is that you're a racist. I was like, no, I'm not a racist. And he looked shocked. Like, how could you disagree with me that you're not a racist? Of course you're a racist. And he looked shocked. But I was shocked because I never thought of myself as a racist. But I do hate some people.
Was he talking
And I
about
like other
implicit racism? Like, racism, like,
Well,
no
he
one's, like, aware?
wanted us to be cured of racism, but the first thing you have to do
imitate
is
the
accept
racist.
that you are a racist and you need to be cured. And I'm like, no, I don't think I'm a racist.
Weird.
Well, remember, I already had a master's degree in philosophy.
Yeah.
And I don't know at what point I learned that race is actually a socially constructed concept. That biologically, when we look at the human beings, we are all members of the human race. There's just one race, right? But we do grow up recognizing differences in people, depending on your culture. You know, so I remember Dinesh D'Souza, who's really gone off the deep end.
Oh, I love him so much with his, like, Hillary Clinton movies.
He's just gone so far.
He went to Dartmouth while my cousin was at Dartmouth.
But his book, The End of Racism, I've read that.
Isn't he in prison? Or did he get out?
He shouldn't be.
I heard he was in prison for like a couple of years because he donated
He gave like
funds.
$25,000 to, which is too much as an individual to a candidate. That's just.
Oh, yeah. He's not in prison anymore, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah, he's still writing books and doing movies, and in any case, the end of racism. And he's from India. And when he got here, one of the things he was absolutely amazed at was the nature of the racism in the United States. 'Cause we do have racism, even though there aren't races, right? But so what is it? And because in India they have the caste system, caste, however you say it, C-A-S-T-E, right? And the idea there is that you're born into a particular social strata that has its rights, privileges, rules, etc. And the bottom caste is the untouchables. They're the ones that clean the sewers, and there's all kinds of, they basically have no opportunities for a decent life whatsoever. But it's not based on race, it's based on genetic inheritance, no matter what you look like. But when he comes to the United States, he sees all of our racial problems. And God bless you. And he ends up writing this was actually the second book. Illiberal Education was his first book, which I read after I read this one. And it was pretty good. And this was excellent. I love this. Where he basically said, this is a socially constructed idea. We've created this. And so we could get rid of it. And by the way, the best solution to getting rid of it is to just stop asking people what their race is. Ignore it. And it will basically go away. Because as long as the government's not like asking you, what race are you? So employers, everyone, they all ask, what's your race, right? Well, guess what? If we all just refused to say that we accepted the socially constructed concept of race, they couldn't keep track of it, and basically the government and everybody else that tries to examine this would simply have no data on which to base their rule. I mean, Harvard right now is going through a fight because it seems to some that they've been prejudicially keeping a lower number of Oriental students in the school in order to maintain a semblance of white balance or whatever.
What about if it's for situations like studies where different people from different parts of the world have different, they have different genetic variations that make it so that they're more likely to develop one health issue or another?
Right. Well, I think you could categorize people by their genetics. One of my favorite authors, I mentioned him multiple times, I think Charles Murray, in his book, The Bell Curve, which is fantastic, even though lots of people notice the real problem, etc. The Bell Curve. This is all about the nature of intelligence, and there's a big part of it. It's only one chapter talks about race, actually, and on page 326 or somewhere around there, he has a paragraph that says, if you're interpreting our thesis as saying that there's a race-based, race is associated with intelligence, you're misunderstanding our point, right? So it's clear as day. They knew it's going to be an issue because they're even talking about it, right? But at the same time, if you read it, I mean, I read it and I could see that yes, there are groups of individuals that clearly are not capable of dealing with modern times, getting the kind of education they have. You've probably met some folks. Now, of course, 25% roughly of the people of this state have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, just not a genetic disorder. I don't think it has any relationship to your genetic inheritance. It has to do with your cultural inheritance, where you find yourself, and if your birth mother basically has to have been drinking alcohol while she was pregnant, and still we have a lot of women who, even while they're pregnant and know that drinking alcohol will have an impact on their child, still go to bars and drink. So even those kits in the female bathroom that says check to see if you're pregnant won't have an impact on them because they don't care. They want to drink, regardless of the effect. And of course, if you've met, yes, go ahead.
I just, like, I know in studies, a lot of times they will use race for, because they can have different subcultures in,
Yes.
in different places, so it makes it easier to, like, try and find out things that could alter the results of the study.
The Ashkenazi have been tightly knit and breeding, we use breeding when we're talking humans, but they've been marrying within their genes for many years, and as a result, when you do IQ tests, they turn out to be the most intelligent human beings right now. And for example, Steven Pinker, who I've mentioned, has written The Better Angels of Our Nature, Enlightenment Now, and lots of other books. It's absolutely fascinating. Is Ashkenazi, and so is his wife, by the way, who also writes philosophy books, talks about Gödel. Imagine how smart are you as a woman if you write biography of Kurt Gödel. It's like way up there, right? It was a great book, by the way. Goldstein is her name. Barbara Goldstein? Let's see. Rebecca Goldstein. That's his wife. By the way, one of her novels that she wrote is about this psychology professor at Harvard, who she's married to, who ends up in a debate over the question of God's existence with a philosopher. So it's kind of a fun. You imagine that she's got her husband in mind while she's writing this novel. I think it's 24 Arguments for the Existence of God, something like that was the novel. Okay, but Murray, Charles Murray, the author of The Bell Curve and lots of other books. So if you think of this as like an active conversation that, I'm not in a sense an active participant, except that I like to spread my interest in it with the classes, right? But I try to keep up with it. It's amazing. At the same time, Murray argues that if we are going to include race as part of it, and we certainly could eventually, once we have enough genetic data to do this, we're probably going to have thousands of races that give us specific genetic backgrounds where you can say, okay, so these folks are not going to be able to do this. Maybe they're going to be able to be incredible marathon runners. I mean, if you go and you look at the people that win all the marathons now, very few British are in there anymore. Instead now they're primarily from a specific area in Africa, Kenya and that area. And when you look at those individuals, they're remarkably tall, skinny, and fast, right? And so there are clearly specific genetic characteristics among different groups of people. And intelligence is just like being able to play football. So in fact, we may even narrow it down to specific types of intelligence, right? So he's not doing away with the idea that race, he doesn't want to say race because, of course, race is a hot issue that gets people upset because it makes it seem like you're automatically categorizing someone based on their appearance as to what they're capable of doing. And that turns out to be just really dumb to do that because the way a person looks doesn't necessarily give you it depends. There are characteristics of people and the way they look that can help. I mean, I can drive downtown, and as I'm driving down, you know, one of the streets, I could see the way somebody walks, and that tells me that that person has fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, because they're not walking with decision. They're not sure where they're walking to, right? And maybe even their clothing indicates that even though they like that shirt and they like that pants, they don't realize that that shirt and that pants don't go together. Right? I mean, I do that too, although I don't think there's anything wrong with wearing brown and black together. You know, some people in this classroom do. That person, did you notice that I said that? You criticized me once for wearing, what was I wearing? Brown shoes? Black pants? No, I had black shoes and brown
I
pants?
think you had a brown jacket and black.
Ah. But brown and black go together, I think. Well, but that's just fun. That was supposed to be fun. Nobody laughed. How? Not all of my jokes are fun. Johnny Carson did the same thing. He told joke after joke after joke on the Tonight Show that nobody laughed at, and then he made a joke about how bad all of his jokes were, and everybody laughed. And so he was a hit. Okay. Well, let's talk about women. Are women the same as men? Anybody say yes? It depends on what we're talking about, right? So more women read than men. More women write than men. But most of the things that are written about are men. So there's all kinds of interesting aspects of it. Women as intelligent as men?
Yeah.
So how come none of the geniuses, the highlighted geniuses, are women?
From what I've understood from studies is that men take up the top and the bottom of the spectrum.
Exactly, and women cluster around the middle. Seems to be a genetic reason for it. Women have 2 X chromosomes. Men have 1 Y and 1 X. The Y doesn't do crap, basically. All it does is triggers maleness. And then the X chromosome is like, oh, so I'm it, and does whatever it wants. And so it's more likely that the child that is a male with a Y, which is the smallest chromosome in the human body, and the X basically designs this human. And since it has no kind of relationship with another X chromosome, it can do really extraordinary things. Most of which turn out to be really horrible, so that you get real assholes out there, right, that are male. But you also get the odd genius, the Mozart, the Einstein, Sir Isaac Newton. We also call them autism, so that's kind of interesting. Notice there's a relationship between autism and genius, and autism is I've seen it called extreme maleness, which is kind of interesting. So that's kind of interesting. Whereas the 2 X's tend to cause themselves to kind of work with one another, and so women tend to be genetically kind of in the medial area, as they're not extremely one way or the other, whereas males can tend to be extremely unique, roughly. So that's kind of interesting. Could it be socially constructed roles, though?
Yes.
The social construction theory says, you know, thanks to Hegel, who gives us the idea that, yes, you know, this is a dialectical process of concepts. Our conception of reality is based on our language, our culture, our concepts, and so we can change our concepts. We do change our concepts, and that changes the way we view reality. We, you know, looking outside at the stars, you know, last night, looking up at these absolutely gorgeous little sparkles up there, and I said to my wife, you know, the stars tonight are just out of this world. That joke got a little snicker, you know. My wife, of course, being the smart one, looks at me and says, yep, they are, you know. They are out of this world, right? But, you know, it used to be thought that they were part of this world. In that sense, the cosmos was included completely in what they meant as the world, right? And, you know, they thought those were even small. You know, the one guy that came along and said, no, they're suns just like our sun, and they're incredibly far away, and they might even have their own planets. They burned him at the stake for thinking that, right? The church, there's a place in the Plaza del Fiori, the flowers in Rome, where they have a plaque on the ground where the stake was, where they burned him, right? For thinking that. You had a...
Oh, well, I was just thinking, like, even if you do buy the whole theory that, like, the two X chromosomes and the one X chromosome, like, soars and, like, is on its own and creates the first. Like, even if men and women are, like, very biologically different, like, if you think about it, like, in the context of feminism and wanting equal rights, like, politically and socially and economically, which is what feminism is about, like, I don't see why feminism is so demonized.
So...
Society. I think people are afraid, like, to change the status quo because obviously the people that are afraid the status quo is working for them very well.
Trans-Alaska Pipeline has fueled Alaska's economy
Yeah.
for 40 years,
I
supporting
hope you
thousands
had a
of
chance
jobs.
to watch this.
Yeah.
I
thought it was really good.
you know, to small kids. It really did. It was a tremendous role model. Helena, what would you do in this situation? What do you think people ought to do?
Well, inequality is really a misconception, and so are the policies for dealing with it. This idea of being unequal, it's just difference, and it's a mistake to assume that men and women want to do things in the same way.
But if you're trying to push forward a feminist agenda now, what would you counsel people who want more equality to do?
Well,
What should the next stage be? Sorry,
I just
Anna,
want to clarify something. I do not think men and women want to do it in the same way.
Good.
I men parent, in my experience, quite differently often than women do, and women definitely work differently than men do. So I'm not suggesting they're going to do it the same way. I'm suggesting, and actually I think it'd be better for raising children if they had the different models of how you raise children. We think we know how to raise children because women have always raised children, but men do. Look at all the gay men that are raising children and doing it very well. So I don't think they'll do it the same way. That's not what I said.
Okay. Men and women do want to do things in different ways. Good.
Yes.
I'm glad we've got to that. So that's very important. And so
But
we're
then
not trying to get a one-size-fits-all solution to the workplace and to the family. Okay. Then we might look at what females prefer when they have the chance to choose. And that's, I think, what you were talking about with the Nordic example, that in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and so on, women have very, very good support for looking after the children, etc., etc. The bottom line is they actually don't want to go back to work full-time in the way that women do in other countries because they have to. In the States, they have to go back to work full-time. In the Nordic countries, they choose not to, and they are really happier that way. That's a choice.
Thank you, Helena. Can I just, Amanda, what should feminism do next?
So,
I think that's interesting, like the paternity leave, like having males like leave for the
yeah,
kids.
one of the things I read in that study is that, I think it was Sweden,
Yeah.
the fathers can choose to spend a couple of months at home with their infant.
That's excellent.
And Was it? But in any case, what I read was that when the father comes back to work several months after caring for the infant, his biochemistry has changed, and he's been feminized, and he's not as competitive as his other male workmates. And so it takes a while for him to get his male characteristics back. So the time that the male spends with the child, in a sense, feminizes. What does it do? It's a biochemical relationship. So like I joked about, that when I cry today, when I was a kid, males weren't supposed to cry. I've noticed though, especially when my wife is watching a tearjerker, that as that, or the church, if someone's doing a present, they're witnessing something, and there's like a pause in the church, and everybody knows the sad thing is coming, and we start to cry even before she says it, and it's like, what is it? How do we all just all get upset and start to cry? And
That's funny that they became like more feminine after watching after the child.
Yeah. Well, and likewise though, all the people that criticized Hillary as not being very feminine, well, she wasn't in a typical feminine job. She was the Secretary of State. The jobs she had, she's out there basically doing a man's job, and the environment makes her male. And so she ends up not being, she's wearing a pantsuit. She's, what did Trump call her? Nasty, because she was competitive. Basically, she was doing what any male would do in order to become president, and yet, of course, she is female. So
that's one of the biggest problems with women representation in politics, is because a lot of people are worried that once women even become in those powerful authority positions, they're so worried that the competition they're going to mold in, they're trying to fix that problem, that they're going to mold into the man's perspectives and go straight back to focusing on the same perspectives that are not they're avoided already.
Because it's the job that does it.
It's the job, yeah.
It's the job turns you into that. You look at an oboist, playing an oboe, whether you're male or female, your mouth looks, because that's the job, right? So, sorry, is that an odd example? But an oboe. You all know what an oboe is.
It looks like a clarinet.
Yeah.
Different
Oh
stuff.
my goodness. I should show you an oboist at work. Sorry. The other night I was trying to figure out which one do I want. I know. Firebird. Which one is this? I want. I have a choice. Here you go.
Democrats have become the party of open borders, crime, and abolishing our brave men and women of ICE and other
This is an
law
ad.
enforcement.
Yeah, midterms are coming up.
Here's oboe. Oh, let me go back. Bassoons. What is this one though? Bass bassoon? There's the oboe. So
They're all men.
they're all men, but we can fix that. We can go back here, and I can go London Symphony, and same. Oh wait,
I'm seeing all
are they
male
males
oboe
too?
players there too.
I know I've seen female.
See, maybe it's
oboists.
something about the
I thought
oboe.
this was. No, they've got female oboists. But they do the same. So they do the same thing. Because it's the job. So the job will transform you. So Helena Cronin, who's the person that I'm highlighting, is an author of a book titled The Ant and the Peacock, Altruism and Sexual Selection. And I know they don't have a picture of her, but you saw her in that dialogue. She was.
Which one was she?
She was the woman that was sitting on the far left, and that everybody else was mad at, because she is the one that says, "Yes, we've got this far. Women and men do things differently," and the others are all infuriated, right? And the reason for it is she's arguing, biology. Biology makes a difference. And the main difference is that men and women have different agendas. They have different approaches to things. If you think biologically, you're thinking mating and, well, these two. The main one that she pulls up here is the peacock. When you think of, and this infuriates a lot of Darwinians, the problem is Darwin argues it's selection, right? Mating selection. And for the most part, the Darwinists would think that it's who the males choose, the dominant males choose to mate with, will give the future generations that will then be the ones from, that will be selected and so on. Well, her point is that the females actually have a great deal to say in the selection. So that the peacocks basically have become the kind of bird with the big plumage that hypnotizes the peahen. But it was the hens that chose that characteristic that enabled those peacocks to basically succeed, right? So it's the females that are also choosing, and that was against the norm. That it was the dominant males that chose. So this gives you up. Well, of course, we've got alpha females that will be the ones that will choose which males get to mate and so on, right? So that kind of throws a wrench into the way the typical Darwinian selection process seemed to take place, right? So that females actually have something to say in who gets selected. Then the ant is there because the ant is an example of an altruist. If you think of an ant colony, the queen is the one that gets to pass on her genetic material. And by the way, there's one of the targets of her book was Richard Dawkins' selfish gene. Which is from the 90s, right? Oh, no, sorry. Her book is the 90s, isn't it? Yeah, I should have looked. But the selfish gene, he's not trying to say that genes are selfish, because being selfish means you have a personality, and genes don't have a personality, right? So that's not what he's trying to say. But he's arguing that in the strict Darwinian sense, genes basically keep reproducing with, if anything, the kind of opportunity to basically reproduce. And so the selection process is which genes are best likely to produce are the ones that will be produced and will be the survivors. All individuals, all organisms actually die. It's the genes that pass on their information, right? So it's the information that life passes on. We're talking about entropy and how life fights entropy. What I said to a lot of folks in our emails was that it's the information. It's life figures out how to pass on the information to the next generation. That information is the genetic makeup of our organism, right? So that's what gets passed on, and it does change It's never exactly the same unless it's a clone. There's some other examples where, what's that situation where some women only have one X chromosome and no Y, right? What's that called?
Hermaphrodites. I don't know.
I think it's called
is it
single X.
Single X?
I think so. Could be wrong.
Turner syndrome. You have a person that's just, well, actually, it's still not going to be identical to the mother because she actually has multiple. I'm not sure how that works. However, because the mother would have. You realize that in your body, your genes can actually be different. That there could even be a mixture of them in your body. So that's kind of interesting too, how that works. And so all individual organisms die eventually, but if they procreate, they pass on their genetic information. So if you think of it in terms of information is what we pass on. And that information then fights against competitors, and so which one is the survivor, so to speak. But when you're looking at ants, except for the queen, are not going to be able to pass on their genetic information. So what motivates their genes to adapt as worker ants that are just there to work for the better, so say that they're trying to get across a stream of water. Some ants will deliberately walk into the water and drown, while other ants walk on top of them, right? So they were motivated to do that genetically, but the thing is, those genes are not trying to procreate. They're sacrificing themselves. They're altruistic, right? So there's a level of altruism in our biology that can't be explained by the selfish gene characteristics, right? So it can't be pure Darwinian evolution that life uses in order to procreate and give ourselves opportunities. And so that's a puzzle. And that goes against then the selfish gene concept, so that it's not just the dominant members of the species that are going to be selected for. Others are going to be selected for their characteristics, even though they're not selected so that they procreate. Does that make sense? I didn't do that very well, but that's part of the argument. In any case, so this confronts the social construct, the socially constructed reality, which certainly makes sense. This is absolutely a fascinating Hegelian point of view, that we're looking at a culture that is full of these concepts that are in a sense passing on. By the way, it was in The Selfish Gene that Richard Dawkins created the concept of a meme. It was page 198, by the way. Right? Everyone talks about memes. How do you say it? M-E-M-E? So it should rhyme with gene. Meme and gene, right? And what is a meme? Anyone know? Offhand? Like, bum 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 bum. Everybody recognize that one? Did I do that well? Beethoven's Fate motif from the Fifth Symphony? Yes?
Isn't it a thing that's generally recognized by people in society?
A little meaningful morsel or bit that passes on information, but typically we would not have thought of a meme as being alive, but what we end up seeing with Susan Blackmore, who was one of Richard Dawkins' grad students, in her book, The Meme Machine. We are the meme machines, by the way. By the way, that works for me because I'm not passing on my genes. I'm actively trying to procreate, or even when my wife and I got married, we wanted to have children. We ended up adopting because we couldn't, for some reason. We read all the books, studied how to do this, and for some reason it didn't work for us, right? Turns out to be harder than you might think, right? So we're not passing on our genes, but I do love passing on my memes. That's what it means to be a teacher, right? I'm absolutely enthusiastic about the memes that have infected me. And so I'm trying to spend my time virally passing these memes on to other people so that they end up liking what I like and thinking the way I think, etc., right? So I'm a meme machine. I'm not living for me, I'm living for the memes that I've been infected with, that I got from other people that infected me with these, right? And in fact, I love them so much. I read all the time, and I watch videos of discussions about these people. Listen closely so I can talk like they do, so that I can sound just like those people. I'm kidding. It's not really the way Philadelphians talk, but you get the idea, right? I'm infected. Isn't that a great way of thinking of this? That we've got, and by the way, that explains the characteristics of the priesthood class, all those generations of priests and nuns that did not procreate genetically, but spent their lives in a monastery or a convent or a school, learning as much of these as they could, and then trying to pass them on to their novitiates, their the novices, their students, etc. Right? And so you become infected with that. So, meme machine. Human being is a meme machine. We're totally taken over by these, and we give up our concern with our own biochemistry in favor of these memes that we're absolutely thrilled with, and passing those on. That's just kind of cool insight, I think. But so they argue they're alive. And if you think in terms of Stuart Kaufman's point of view of what life is, I mentioned he was the scientist that Al Gore interviewed at the White House when they were trying to send a space not Voyager, but they were sending a ship to Mars
Curiosity.
to look for life. It was earlier than that, I think. Which was the earlier one? This was back a rover, a Mars rover, something.
Spirit and Opportunity.
So they sent these, and the goal was to find, not just to take pictures, but also to find life. And Al Gore says, "So, what is life?" And they were all stunned, pretty much, sitting there, except for Stuart, who came up with the idea that life is any complex system that does one work cycle and reproduces itself. That's his definition of life. Because what they're hoping is that when they find life on Mars, it's not going to be boring Earth-like. It's going to be something different, right? But so what do you use to define life? And so it's a complex system, so it can't be just absolutely simple, right? It goes through one work cycle, right? So it does something. And one of the things it does is it reproduces itself. passes on its information somehow, right? You know, so that's what life is. I had the opportunity, by the way, to talk to Stuart Kaufman when he was here, and I even got to talk to him while he was drunk, because after these speakers were brought here back when UAA had money, and he was here. He gave a lecture to the whole community on Thursday. Friday he gave a special lecture to the faculty that were interested, and then we all took him out to dinner up at, what is it, Glacier's restaurant up in Girdwood. It was the first time, Seven Glaciers. So that was the first time I got to go up there, because I couldn't afford to even think about going up there on my own. But since Senator Stevens' earmarks were paying for it, I went, and I ended up sitting right opposite Stuart, and he had a few, and I pointed out to him that his definition didn't apply to me, because my friends would have said that I never did a day's work in my life, and I haven't procreated, right? So he looked at me and he said, no definition is good for everything, you know, it's just, because I'm not life, you know, I don't meet his criteria, right? But if we're looking for memes, people will argue they're not life. It's a word, you know, or Beethoven's blah, 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 right? You know, this, I would say that this is absolutely a meme. Or, about this one.
Always steam peeled, never
They're
peeled
trying to
chemicals.
create memes, by the way. That's
We
what
do
an
things our way,
advertisement does.
so you can do things your
They create a
way.
meme that stays in your head, that you'll think about it when you're
Hunts,
shopping.
grow confident.
Everybody recognize that? So that would be a meme. You're gonna cry. Why did she have to kill Hedwig?
I know, that was the only part in Harry Potter that I cried, was when Hedwig died.
But you might think, that's not alive. Well, it is a complex system. It's that melody, right? And it performs a work cycle. And in order to do that, it imbibes the energy that comes to feed the orchestra. And they play it. And guess what? When you hear it, you walk off and you repeat it. So guess what? It fits. It fits the definition we're using today for life. Yes?
But that doesn't fit the biological definition for life. Right.
The biological definition isn't the only definition of life we have. But here's the, you know, I know where you want to go with that, and that's the odd feeling is, wait a minute, a meme isn't alive, right? It can infect me, and it kind of it works like a virus. Or in fact, by the way, is a virus biological?
It's just code.
It's not, right?
It's not live, but it has an agenda, it does things.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, so we've got other things besides memes that are borderline. We don't necessarily want to think of them as life, and yet they are, in a way. They meet this criteria. So, I mean, that definition was for Mars, but it actually applies to all sorts of things. By the way, Stuart Kaufman, he's the one that points out life you get for free. Whenever, you know, so they were, you know, at the time looking for when does life occur? You know, how is it a miracle? Because it's so different than everything else. So it turns out, as we do science, we end up discovering that it's really just a level of complexity. At a certain level of complexity, life is there for free. That's Stuart's expression. Stuart means by for free is that I'll just go here. So you think something absolutely special has, a thunderbolt or lightning bolt hit a soupy primordial, slime somewhere, and then all of a sudden, it's alive. What's a meme? That's a meme, right? It's alive. Where's that from? Frank, pardon? You could use it for lots of things, but it's alive. If I just type it, like, it's alive. Is she okay? Hope she's okay. We're finished at 12:45.
Yeah.
So I should ask you a
The
question.
beginning of one of Wells' most spectacular opening sequences.
It's alive. That was, well, what's the quiz question I had? I had a good quiz question for today. No, I can't remember what it was. But I can find it. I used it. Okay. So this is the quiz question. How does reality push back against the socially constructed reality? So we've got a socially constructed reality. We can say that humans' roles in our society are socially constructed. But frequently when we decide for justice's sake that we will transform these roles so that things are more equal or that people get treated more fairly, we do our best and something in life fights us and will refuse to adapt to our attempts to make life more just. But what is it? What is it in life that pushes back against our hopes to transform the socially constructed reality so that it's more just? Something in nature, something in life, something in reality pushes back. I mean, I can't decide that I'm going to bend this table in half. That would be dumb. Why on earth would I do that? But if I went to try to do that, the table would resist me. I can't just change it. Money is socially constructed, perhaps the classic example. And it really is. I mean, the only reason that our money has value is because we psychologically all agree that it does. And if all of a sudden we all gave it up, which has happened depending on the money and the history, right? Venezuela right now, their money isn't worth crap, right? Everybody's giving up on it, and once that happens, even the government gives up on it. They just start printing tons of it for, that doesn't help. Reality fights back, though, on other things. Money seems like we could get away with all sorts of things. But you can't just decide, oh, this money isn't worth anything and throw it out. Everybody will come over and grab it. We'll even have a riot over it if you throw bags of it out of the back of a truck, right? So they disagree with you. Reality fights back. So the question is, how? How does that fight back? You had a question?
You were just talking about things that keep us from being the most just that we can. And I was going to say, a lot of it comes down to primal urges that people might have. that may not mesh totally with societal standards.
A lot of religions believe that giving in to the body, the temptation to eat, to have sex, to enjoy soft things, like petting a dog. We actually get biochemicals changed in our bodies when we pet a dog. What is it, oxytocin, I guess we get when you pet a dog. And by the way, the dogs seem to like it too, right? So there's aspects to our biologies that you can't just ignore. And so, of course, when we're looking at this issue over feminism, whether women should be treated the same as men, should they get the same kind of jobs, why have they had such a difficult time getting through that glass ceiling, etc., right? Is it because our biologies are so different that some roles are just not what women want? That even though they have the opportunity now, they don't want those. They don't want to do those things. Whereas men still feel competitively driven to try to get those kinds of jobs. Part of it is because men want to be attractive to the opposite sex, and so there's like an agenda that the males have to try to be attractive, and there's an agenda that the females have. They're furious when they go to a mixed meeting, and the males behave differently than the females. Why can't they all behave like us? Well, that's not even possible, really. Are those drives? We would call those innate drives in us that fight back? Yes. You can call it that. You have to call it something. But of course it infuriates those that want it to just go away. I suspect that we have transformed the socially constructed roles that we play in our society. That is what we are transforming. And that actually has caused lots of problems for the traditional way that families, families are collapsing. Charles Murray talks about that in not collapse, what is it? I'll have to find it. Coming apart. Coming apart. By the way, he got into so much hot water over the bell curve where he talked about different types of people, aka races, if you will. For example, he got kicked by the crowd away from Middlebury, where he was supposed to give a speech, March a year ago, right? And probably, I think I mentioned that already. All of that still because of the bell curve, which was years ago. In this book, he talks about the state of white America, as he's not going to get into that at all. So there's no grounds for getting upset with him. He's just talking about Caucasians in this particular case. And he basically concludes that the main reason that we're coming apart is because there are four main things that a society needs to do in order to stay together. And one of those is that men and women need to get married and stay married so that they can raise their children. Number two, you have to be honest with one another. Number three, you have to be industrious and work hard in order to earn a living, etc. And number four, you have to go to church. Doesn't matter which church, as long as you go every week, because that ties you into the rest of the community. So those are the four things that social stability require of us in order for us to not be coming apart. But notice the first thing, marriage, and in the various towns that he looks at, one of the things that he sees that have totally fallen apart is marriage. We have the situation now where we have many more single homes raising children. So mostly, of course, women. And name specific towns, and that's data that you could just pull, as he does, to show that. There are still, of course, some marriages that are still raising children. I was looking at this picture here. As I look at that picture, what I see is an alpha male, an alpha female, and two upcoming alpha females. And that's a success. That's a successful family right there. Right? Traditional male, female, together raising children. And we don't have that many of those anymore. That's kind of interesting. Yes.
But there's also times when the mother and father, I would think sometimes it's best that they aren't both there, because they may have kids before they realize who the other person really is, and if they can actually be with them. So it's, in instances like that, it could cause more issues to have them both.
So they have children before they really get to know one another.
Or like things can come up in the future that they didn't think would happen, and could be years down the line.
Since it was written in like 2012, that book, does he talk about like gay people at all, like their family structure? Or does he say it's like not good for society?
I don't remember him bringing up that. He talks about two places. Fishtown in Philadelphia, which I've been to. It's where I always stop to get a McDonald's meal after I fly into Philadelphia. It's on my way to visit relatives, etc., which I won't be doing anymore because they're no longer there. But so I know where Fishtown is and everything. Is kind of interesting. By the way, Fishtown's coming back, but it's not because the original inhabitants have reformed themselves. They've all been removed, basically, as it's become a urban. It's going through urban renewal, basically. So that's interesting. But the other places that he talks about where things are successful are the super zips. I don't know if he's the one that called them the super zips or what, but you can zero in and find where these super zips are. By the way, there are none in Alaska. You have no a zip code.
What does it mean?
So if you live in one of these super zips, you are number one, you're a millionaire. Both you and your wife have gone to either Harvard or Yale or both, right? So you might have gotten the one degree at Harvard, but then went to Yale. And she went. You met her at Yale, and she got both of her degrees at Yale or whatever, right? So Harvard or Yale. We do have individuals in town that are millionaires, have their degrees from Harvard or Yale. I know some of them, but the trouble is they don't live in a zip code where everyone that lives in that zip code has those characteristics. And then the other thing, of course, is that they need to be married, raising their children, and making sure that the children have all those benefits so that they kind of like Brett Kavanaugh, go to the best schools, have all the best opportunities, don't get in trouble for things they do, etc. Right? So, super zip. There are places where you could go, and believe it or not, all the people that live in that community have those characteristics. And they all get together, they all have friends, they have churches where they're all. The closest church we have in town to a super zip type church is St. Mary. By the way. Have a good day. Is this fun? Everybody happy? I didn't piss anybody off? Talking about equality, wow. Lucky I don't get death threats. Somebody bombed my car.
Do you want this?
Probably a statistic out there somewhere.
There is, I bet. Did you friend me in Facebook?
No, but now I want to.
Oh, okay, because somebody did, but it didn't, the name didn't ring a bell, but the face looked similar.
The face is similar? No,
So I always, if I click yes, I want it to actually be someone I know rather than
No, but now I'm gonna
sell
look.
me a phone or something.
I was just curious, so, I'm working on my, the project that's in Paris. I'm finishing up my essay on my report on it. Not much of a because I like to be perfectionist.
That's fine.
Okay, so I wanted to see, do you want a half draft or kind of send it when I'm done? So
You can send it when you're done. You can
Okay.
send me,
Okay,
whatever.
I just didn't know, because I didn't wanna.
I'm just trying to make sure everybody is actively working on it so that,
Yeah, I looked at your service and I was like, oh my gosh, I missed the deadline, but I'm almost done with it and I'm starting to work on it, so I was wondering, is that
That's
okay?
cool.
Okay, awesome, just wanted to
what,
double check.
excellent.
Thank you so much, have a good one.
You too. That's the Boy Scout. Oh, well. Too much fun?
Hello?
I would argue it's very
Difficult to have too much fun.
It is.
I don't think it's something that happens very often.
Usually when you do, you throw off.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry to walk out on you, Mr.
Oh.
I actually had a stomach ache, so I wasn't through what.
Oh, sorry.
So I was having too much fun today, but I'll be fine.
It's not, you're not pregnant, you don't have,
Oh, no, it's not.
you don't have morning
It's kind
sickness.
of beyond the morning.